Hi, I'm Carice and welcome to Scofield Farm. Today I want to talk about what should you grow if you're a new gardener and maybe you don't have a lot of space or you haven't grown a lot of things yet. I remember back at our first home not having a lot of space to grow things. We had two giant oak trees. I'm talking about like the heritage oaks. We bought the house because the backyard oak looked like an ent to us from Lord of the Rings, and we fell in love with it. However, that made growing anything very difficult. We couldn't even grow grass because of full shade, and I mean full shade. So, growing things in containers, in pots on my porch was the way to go as a newer gardener. And I learned so much in the process. I feel like it was great practice for learning how to grow plants, what would grow where, and getting my appetite whet for what it was like to have fresh food available right outside my door all the time. I started with growing herbs, and I started growing herbs in pots on the steps up to my door of our first home. And I want to show you how easy that is and just share with you the reasons why I think that everybody should be growing fresh herbs. Right here in this pot below, I have thyme growing in a pot, and I also have oregano growing in a pot. Thyme was the very first herb that I grew in a pot. I'm trying to think. I think it was about 17 years ago, and I have been growing it ever since. I love to use thyme in roasting chickens. I love to use thyme in making my own bone broth, and there's so many different recipes and stuff that you can use thyme for, and it's very, very easy. Where we live in Northern California in Zone 9B, thyme is actually a perennial, so that means that it stays alive year-round. It kind of goes maybe a little bit dormant in a winter season, and then it comes back really vigorous in the spring. And so we always have access to thyme. Oregano is another one for us that I love. Oregano is perennial, and oregano seems to die back a little bit in the winter, but it comes back to life. And right here is our oregano plant. And what I like to do is I like to just pick it. If you look closely, there are little leaves growing, and I like to call that almost like picking it where there's a leaf growing in the elbow, and I pinch it off, and then I will either use my oregano fresh, or I will dry a bunch of oregano on our dehydrators, so I always have freshly dried oregano to use. And growing your herbs is so awesome because herbs are so expensive at the grocery store when they're fresh. And even when they are dried, it's such a small little jar that you buy that I just think so many people use herbs, and herbs are so pricey that it is really a great, easy type of thing to grow if you're new to gardening. And you don't need a lot of room. All you need is a pot and a front step that gets a little bit of light. A lot of herbs can be grown in partial shade. The area we have actually has a lot of shade because it's underneath some really big trees, and it gets late afternoon or hottest sun, but it actually does well with the sun. I want to show you a couple other herbs I grow and talk about them and why I like them. Now this is my pot of chocolate mint. It is a wonderful variety of mint. It makes a very lovely tea. I'd love to make a simple syrup with it sometime too, but I grow mint specifically in a pot because mint can be invasive. Mint can take over an entire garden bed. I don't want it to take over an entire garden bed, so I keep it contained. This is another one though that'd be very easy if you don't have a lot of space to garden and you want to grow an herb. Lavender is an herb, and a lot of people think of it as a flower, but it actually is an herb. You can do infusions, you can make teas, you can make satchels, you can make simple syrups. You can make all sorts of things with lavender, and lavender is also a perennial. It will come back year after year. Ours stays alive all winter. It actually often has a winter bloom. So lavender is another one that I think is great to grow. You can grow it for the pollinators. You can grow it to use yourself. It is an awesome herb, and it fits in landscaping very well, but also could be grown in a pot. Another herb I absolutely love, sorry it's very bright out here, is rosemary. I started my rosemary from just pulling off 2 branches from my sister's huge rosemary bushes that are full of flowers and bees, and I wanted my own. So I pulled off 2 branches, I stuck them in a cup of water and waited, I think it was actually a couple months for them to root well, and then I stuck them in the ground once they were rooted. A very primitive way of propagating. It was nothing fancy, no hardening off, and I want to show you my rosemary now. It is a big, beautiful bush. It does not have flowers yet, but we harvest from this rosemary a lot. I make teas with it. It is wonderful in different cooking. My favorite type of country potatoes, we use rosemary. And so it's a very easy herb to grow. It does well in many different climates, and it will just get bigger and bigger and more fruitful for you, and the pollinators also love it as well. This year, I decided to grow an herb garden right outside our back door underneath this beautiful Japanese maple tree. It's a coral bark Japanese maple, and I am growing ginger. If you look that on the far side, I am growing cilantro, which is already bolting. Cilantro does not like the warm weather, but if I let it go to seed, these seeds are actually coriander seeds, which we dry and grind as a spice, so it also is in the herb category. We are growing calendula, which I like to use as a tea, and I'm going to make a salve with. We are growing lemon balm. Lemon balm also can be invasive. This is a new one, so we will see if I regret putting it in this area. We are growing a nice variegated lemon thyme. It's got more of a citrusy flavor than my other thyme. And we're growing several different kinds of basils. Some of them are pretty small, but they will get bigger. I have a lot of other basil in the garden, but I wanted some close to the back door. Here's an example of cilantro when it's fully gone to seed. And this is the coriander that we actually harvest these brown, and we grind them in a spice grinder, or what a lot of people used to use as coffee grinders, and we use this as our ground coriander spice in our cooking. This herb right here is a summer savory that came back. I have just started using summer savory, and I actually hadn't realized this came back. I had it here last year, and I want to get more into this herb. It is quite lovely in bone broth. Here is a little dill, and I have blooming dill right over here. Now, dill can be used either as the flower head. I've put this into a jar of pickles. It can be used when it dries out, and it can be used as the dill weed, which is the greens. Here's the dried out. You can use these seeds. They all have the dill flavor, or as I showed you over here, you can use the actual dill weed, and they all give you that wonderful dill flavor. One thing about dill is that it retains its flavor really well frozen, like the weed frozen. I've also dried it. I also dry the seeds. As I said, I put the whole flower head in a jar of pickles. There's so many ways to use dill. It is a wonderful herb, and it actually self-seeds and comes back each year pretty easily. So it's one, if you have it in your garden or in a pot, you probably are going to have it year after year, even though it's technically an annual. Another medicinal herb I have gotten into is coneflower or echinacea. Echinacea is beautiful. It has such a delicate, sweet fragrance. The bees love it. That was almost on cue. And I have dried the leaves and the flower petals for a medicinal tea when my kids don't feel well in the winter. I heard you can also split the root, but you need to wait a couple years to do that, and I have not tried that myself quite yet. This is one that comes back year after year as a perennial, at least in zone 9. Is any of this info helpful to you? If so, would you take a second and press the like button? This helps other people who this information would help be able to see my video, and it would help me out a lot. Here is another look at some calendula. As I said, they're wonderful to dry to use in salves. They're really good for your skin, but I've even used them dried in teas. Here is a little volunteer cilantro that still has its green leaves coming up in between all of these peppers in this pepper bed. And that's probably why it hasn't bolted yet. So I'll need to harvest and use some of that. Hopefully it's still around when I get some of these tomatoes ready for salsa. This is another view of my Tulsi basil. It is wonderful for tea and it smells so wonderful. And this is my Thai basil, and Thai basil will end up with a purple flower, and it is a rare basil that is even better flavored with the flower. Italian basils you would like to use before they flower and to pinch off over and over so they don't actually go to seed. And I'm going to clip off some of this Tulsi basil right now, also called holy basil, because I want that for tea tonight. I cannot get over the aroma. It's beautiful. This one is a mammoth basil, and it is used similar to an Italian basil. It just has nice large leaves. See how nice and big the mammoth basil leaves are? They're so nice. This one's like the size of my hand. And here is some of my favorite Italian basil called Emily basil. I've been pitching it back little by little to get it bushy. And my favorite way to use this, I like it in tea, but I love it in pesto. And we make enough pesto and freeze it in cupcake tins, like muffin tins, and pop those little pucks out, put them in big gallon bags, and we use it all winter long. It is one of our favorite things to preserve from our garden. Now remember, basil does die off in the winter, so that's when you're going to want to plant every year, but so many other herbs actually will come back for you depending on your climate. One of my favorite herbs to grow is chamomile, because I am a big herbal tea drinker at night, and there is something so wonderful about the flavor of fresh chamomile tea. I dry it, but I also put the blossoms in a tea infuser, completely fresh off of the plant. Now, to harvest chamomile, you just pop the flower off, and it will actually keep producing if you keep harvesting the flowers. So you can actually get a lot of chamomile even from one plant. But I like to sprinkle them all through my garden and over in my pollinator and herb garden as well. It's just one of my very favorites. Now, I cannot talk about herbs without talking about chives, because I grow a lot of chives. And for a while I mostly grew chives for the blossoms that the pollinators loved and for their pest protection. But actually now, chives is one of the things I do the most preserving of, and I make wonderful dried chives we use all year long. This herb has 2 big spotlight patches in my garden. Now you got to be careful, because culinary sage can be invasive. I mean, it is huge. This thing takes up probably 5 feet width of this garden bed. I cut it back to almost nothing every winter, and it comes back with a vengeance. It is a wonderful herb for so many reasons. My favorite way to use sage is actually sauteed, just lightly browned in brown butter. It is just delicious, so tasty when you put it on things a little bit crispy in brown butter. And like so many other herbs, it's got great medicinal properties, and we use it when we're sick. Anytime someone has a little tickle in their throat, we brew up some sage tea, and often we'll put a little local honey from our backyard in it as well. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, but this is something that we just love to use as our family, and I love to use things in my garden. One herb I have hiding under my squash vines and my pumpkin vines is parsley. I've had a hard time here with parsley wanting to bolt in the summers, so I'm trying this year to grow it in the shade. And fresh parsley is wonderful and can add up at the grocery store, especially if you buy it organic. It's obviously enjoying its shady location. I was chatting with a friend at a 4th of July barbecue about a wonderful potato salad she made that had yogurt and like 5 different kinds of fresh herbs. And those really add up at the grocery store. And I was talking to her about gardening and was encouraging her to start a herb garden on her porch, just like I'm sharing with you, because I really think if you're going for the best bang for your buck, fresh herbs are the way to go. And you can dry them. You don't have to have a dehydrator. A lot of them you can just hang in a bundle from like a little nail in the wall, and they'll dry out and last you a very long time. But herbs are easy. They are able to be in smaller containers. As I said, some actually do better to be contained because they're more invasive, and they actually save you so much money if you're going to use fresh herbs. So I want to share with you, this is how I think you should start gardening if you aren't gardening yet, or if there's an herb that I mentioned that you haven't tried yet. I think you should give it a try. Herbs are amazing. They also bring diversity to your garden and attract pollinators when you let them flower. I want to encourage you. Grow something. If you're new, don't try to do all of them at once. Pick one or two, just like I picked thyme as my first herb to grow on my porch, and go from there. Start small. Do something, and don't think that you are unable to grow food. You absolutely can, even in small places and not ideal locations. I didn't always have all of this room to grow food like I do now. I practiced and waited and did what I can in unideal circumstances, in places that weren't the best place to grow food or the most space or the most sun for a very long time. And I just want to encourage you, you can do it too. You can grow food. You can grow herbs. And I think you should start with herbs if you haven't grown anything before. Thanks for joining me. Happy gardening. If this kind of content is something that you enjoy, how about you subscribe? That way you will find out about my future videos, and you can take the ride with me as we grow food, as we raise animals, as we raise 7 children, and do life. Bless you. I'll see you again soon. Is there something that I didn't mention? If you have a question or comment about growing herbs, or want to share your own experience with gardening in small, not ideal spaces, maybe mostly doing a container garden on your porch, how about you leave a comment below? I'd love to engage with you in dialogue and talk about growing herbs.